Hey everybody, Abigail here, and thank you for dropping by my channel today. On this channel, I will be doing reading wrap-ups as well as book reviews, and you'll also find videos periodically that chronicle my efforts to become a world-renowned Scottish hammered dulcimer player. I'm also trying to learn the ocarina, so you can see me struggling through that. Good times. In today's video, however, I would like to focus on a reading wrap-up for the month of March 2018. So in this video, I will be talking about all of the books I read in March, what I thought of them, and my general impressions. I'll also be talking about my current reading list and what I think about them so far. So let's get started. Alright, the first book I would like to talk about today is one that I just finished. It is Haruki Murakami's Sputnik, Sweetheart. This is a book that's about a young woman named Lemire, who is an aspiring writer and who dresses like a character out of a Jack Kerouac novel. She's obsessed with Jack Kerouac. And she falls in love with an older, more sophisticated woman. And before this point, she didn't even consider herself to be a lesbian or sexually attracted to anyone for that matter. And the whole story is told from the point of view of an unnamed narrator, which I found to be really interesting. I loved this book just like I love all of Murakami's work. I haven't read anything by him yet that I haven't enjoyed. This one does not have exactly the same dreamlike qualities as Wind Up Bird Chronicle or Kafka on the Shore. It's a little more realistic, but at the same time it definitely has some otherworldly elements. What I love most about Murakami's work is that you can't always tell the difference between madness, dream, and reality. They're all intertwined so closely, and he has a way of making the fantastic feel very ordinary and acceptable, while making reality seem very engaging, unpredictable, and strange. And so I really enjoyed this one a lot. It was a very quick read. I read it in I don't know, a day and a half, something like that. I think it's the quickest read of his that I've ever read. And overall, I would definitely recommend this one, especially if you haven't read any Murakami before. This might be a good stepping stone before you start reading some of his longer works. Alright, the next book I would like to talk about on the list is The Underwater Welder, a graphic novel by Jeff Lemire. And this one I also really enjoyed. I'll just go ahead and read the description on the back. As an underwater welder on an oil rig off the coast of Nova Scotia, Jack Joseph is used to the immense pressures of deep-sea work. Nothing, however, could prepare him for the pressures of impending fatherhood. As Jack dives deeper and deeper, he seems to pull further and further away from his young wife and their unborn son. Then one night, deep in the icy solitude of the ocean floor, something unexplainable happens. Jack has a mysterious and supernatural encounter that will change the course of his life forever. And this one's definitely set from a blue-collar working perspective, which I think is really well reflected in the really rough black and white illustrations. And this book has an introduction by Damon Lindelof, Damon Lindelof. And he makes the comparison that this book is very much like watching an episode of The Twilight Zone. And after reading it, I would definitely agree. It's got this eerie, quiet feel to it. And I also really liked the themes that it dealt with in here, as the main character really struggles to deal with the grief of losing his father as a child, as in the present he is trying to keep himself from becoming his father and abandoning his family in the same way that he felt abandoned as a child. Alright, next up is Binti by Nnedi Okorafor. This was a novella and I absolutely loved this book. It was so cool to see from this perspective. This is a Hugo and Nebula Award winner. and it deserved every award it got, in my opinion. It's about a woman named Binti who is a member of a tribe set in future Africa, and she is invited to attend University, the finest institution of higher learning in the galaxy. But this is set like planets away, this university. And her family does not agree with her going, and essentially is going to disown her if she goes, but she chooses to go in secret anyway, and take her chance because she really wants to learn. On the way to University, her ship runs aground with this alien race called the Meduse, and Binti in turn has to struggle to even make it to the university. She has to struggle to survive, using the wisdom of her people that is unique to her. And my only complaint about this novella is that it was so short. And I really wanted more. The pacing did seem fast, but it was also really efficient and really refreshing to have something that did so much world building in so little space, and left so much room for the imagination to fill in the further gaps. I'm really excited to read the future books in this series. It's part of a trilogy, and those are definitely on my to-be-read list. All right, next up is the Six of Crows duology, and I only have the second book here to show you because the other one was on my Kindle, wah, wah, but this is the cover of the second book. However, during the month of March, I did read both books in the series. The first one is Six of Crows, the second one is Crooked Kingdom, both by Leigh Bardugo, and I would sort of describe these books as they're young adult, and I would describe them as Artemis Fowl meets Mission Impossible, set in a fantasy world. So if that sounds appealing to you, you'll probably like this series. I enjoyed Six of Crows, the first book, more than the second one. There was a lot of great things that happened in the second book, but the first one felt so much tighter to me and more intriguing. And in this one, I did feel like the pacing dragged in places, or there was just a lot of unnecessary internal exposition. There were things that could have been structured differently to make the story move at a faster pace. And I found myself getting really impatient with the second book, whereas in the first one, I just basically tore through it. But this has a really interesting, it's one of these books that switches from character point of view to point of view each chapter, which usually just annoys me. There are very few books that it doesn't annoy me for, and initially in this series, that's something that did annoy me. However, once you get to know all of the characters, I ended up loving all of them, and it really does have great characterization. It also has characters, perspectives that you don't normally see from. It has strong female characters who are very powerful and intelligent and have a lot of agency. It also deals with how to deal with trauma, or the echoes of trauma, and how that can continue to affect people years into their lives. It also has LGBTQ characters in it, which is unique for YA literature, something that's becoming thankfully more common, but is definitely present here, and that I really appreciated its presence. It also has an interesting magical system in the form of the Grisha, and overall I felt like the plots were really interesting, and that all of the characters were very driven and had significant motivation that was driving the story along. So definitely recommend this series if you're into YA, and even if you're not, because it's kind of like sort of on the grittier end of the YA spectrum. All right, last up for the month of March 2018 is Kings of the Wyld by Nicholas Eames. And this one is another hefty fantasy novel, and it is from the perspective of Clay Cooper, who was once a member of a famous epic mercenary group. And in this world, mercenary groups are sort of akin to modern-day rock stars. They're famous, they're celebrated, and that trope sort of gets played up a lot throughout this novel. But Clay is now middle-aged, and he put aside his mercenary sword years ago and hasn't seen any of his bandmates for years. He now has a wife and a daughter, and all he wants to do is live a simple, quiet existence with his family for the rest of his life. Unfortunately, one of his old bandmates shows up at his door begging him to help him rescue his own daughter, who's under siege at the hands of this impossible demonic horde. And Clay eventually is broken down and agrees to go with him. So they sort of go and get the band back together. And if you've ever seen the movie Red, and if you enjoyed that, you would probably enjoy this book. I really liked that this was told from a middle-aged perspective. The other thing that I really liked about it is that it has every single possible fantasy and D&D trope in it that you could possibly think of. And yet it didn't feel derivative because Nicholas Eames knew exactly what he was doing and why he was doing it, and he made it so exaggerated that it's just incredibly humorous. It doesn't take itself seriously, and the tone often reminded me of Terry Pratchett, who I love, rest his soul. R.I.P. Terry Pratchett. I will say that this is Nicholas Eames' first book, and you can definitely tell. There were parts of it, the beginning part was definitely more heavily refined than the second half. The middle half kind of dragged a little bit. The first half was perfect. I wouldn't change a thing. The middle half dragged a bit, and then the last, I don't know, quarter to half even of the book felt very rushed. Like they spent a huge chunk of the book leading up to the main kind of climax. And then when the climax happens, it ends up feeling very anticlimactic and rushed. They spend their whole time sort of getting to the main battle, and then when the battle happens, it happens within like 3 pages or something like that. So I found the pacing in this to definitely be off, and there were a lot of aspects that I thought could have been either cut or drastically cut back on in order to expedite the mission and really let the great parts of the book shine. So I think I definitely disagreed with some of the editing in here. I think it still needed some editing before it made it out into the world. However, this was also a lot of fun to read, and I would definitely recommend it. All right, now that we've talked about the books that I read from March 2018, let's talk about what I'm currently reading. And so here I have So Good They Can't Ignore You, Why Skills Trump Passion in the Quest for Work You Love by Cal Newport. I also have, that I just started, so I can't really say much about it yet, Spaceman of Bohemia by Jaroslav Kalfar. Sorry if I am butchering that name. And then I've also got The Deed of Paksenarrion by Elizabeth Moon, and this is an older one. I think this was the first book series that Elizabeth Moon ever wrote, and I actually haven't read any of her other books yet too either, although I heard that her more recent trilogies are really good. This is the second time I've attempted to read this book. I first picked it up at a used bookstore, I think in 2012, and I got about 150 pages in and threw in the towel. I am now past that mark. I'm at 200, and I'm really considering throwing in the towel. This is technically a trilogy omnibus with all 3 books in one, and I haven't even finished the first book technically yet. I've heard that this is one of those reads that if you can slog through it is worth it, but I've also heard my main issues with it so far is that she will easily spend 10 pages describing verbatim, step by step, every texture of the road that Pax is marching on, and yet we get very little insight into Pax's feelings and perspective. And I'm somebody who really cares about stories that are character driven, and this does not feel character driven to me, even though the whole point is that it's like the legend of this character and how she came to be. I still don't care about her. And the secondary characters that I learned to care about, Liz went ahead and killed off. And so at this point, I'm getting kind of frustrated and feeling like I've also heard from some reviews that that doesn't necessarily change throughout the series, and that basically her character ends up kind of flat and Mary Sue throughout the whole thing. If you've read this book and if you think it's worth it, please let me know down below. If you've read this book and you think it's not worth it, please let me know down below. Should I keep going, or should I give up and turn my attention elsewhere? Alright guys, thank you for watching my video today. I know it was a long one, so thanks for sticking with me. If you want to see more content like this in the future, please click that like button and subscribe down below. It'll really help my channel, and I will see you guys next time.